So the topic of today is a follow-on from the end of yesterday's satsang, which was about authenticity. And the purpose for talking about any topic in the satsang is really because it's a subtopic of the main topic that is always spoken about. So whenever anything's heard, we really should always ask, how does this relate to what the talks are really about? So it's very important for me to specify what the talks are about. And the talks are really about what our seeking should be about. So the talks are about happiness for the human being in this life. And happiness means something very specific. It means peace of mind, continuous, unbroken peace of mind for the human being in this life. So that's what the talks are about. And the talks are about that because our seeking at some point needs to be known to be about that. So we should really ask ourselves the question, what am I really seeking in practical terms? Now, this add-on about practical terms is important because our thinking works in such a way that we can understand a concept and believe that somehow that is known practically, or that the concept is practical. And in fact, many concepts are either talking about the practical, and yet we don't actually know the practical. We know the content of the concept. And that's why we think that we understand it practically, because the content of the concept is about practical life. However, if we never go down to the level of feeling, then we can understand a concept that's talking about practical living and understand it intellectually and actually be stuck in theory. So, and secondly, there are many concepts that we can understand theoretically, and they are always talking about theory and not practice. So if we talk about certain concepts that are not practical, so if we talk about the body being energy, in a way that's not practical, because in practical terms, the body is flesh and blood. Now, there is, so that might not be a perfect example, because we can, practically speaking, feel an energetic component to the body. But if we say the body is just energy, that's a concept. And it, by and large, if we take it too absolutely, that says the body is just energy, theoretically that's correct. The skin and the bone and everything in life is energy moving. But it's not a practical concept. When you open the door and grab hold of the handle, practically speaking, you're not grabbing hold of energy. You're grabbing hold of a wooden doorknob or a metal doorknob. So it's not wrong. The concept that says the doorknob is energy is not wrong, but it's not practical. It's not a practical description. So if we say that all houses are piles of bricks, if we're walking down the road and we go, oh, that's a pile of bricks, we might technically be correct, but practically speaking, we're better off referring to it as a house. So at some point, we should ask ourselves, what are we really seeking? What is the seeking all about in practical terms? So as to make sure that we're not lost in a concept that might be right in theory, but maybe because we have come to understand the theory of it, it may well be keeping us from seeing the practical manifestation. So what that means is if you've understood that the doorknob is energy and you've understood it really well intellectually, you might actually become convinced in a way that that concept is truth. And you then try to convince everyone that the doorknob is energy. And in practical terms, it's not. And so if you keep holding on to the notion that that doorknob is energy and the energy you hold, it means you're not really seeing the doorknob truly. And similarly, if you only know the doorknob as metal and the notion of it being energy just doesn't exist in your mind, then once again, you also don't know the doorknob truly. Because it's sort of both, not one or the other. And in spiritual seeking, a lot of the concepts are theoretical concepts. And if we hold on to them as truth, we will miss some of the nuances, and we will sometimes be completely disconnected from what is here, because the concept has got us looking at another aspect of what's here. And often the concepts direct us to an aspect of what's here because it's not known, it's not seen. And in a way, other components that are here need to be diminished in order for our attention to see that which hasn't been seen. And so the concepts can present themselves in a sort of absolute way, saying this is the truth. And then when we get it, whatever that concept is pointing at, and we see it, and then we might actually think that that is what needed to be seen, that it is all that exists. We might actually think that the other is not true, that the other doesn't exist. And the irony is often we have the sense that we now know the truth. And the irony, it's ironic because we might be convinced we know the truth, whereas actually we are mistaking the relative as something absolute. We might be looking at one side, the side that we weren't looking at before, and we've come to see that side that we hadn't seen before, but now we might be unable to see the side that we used to see previously. So the teaching asks, in order to avoid this from happening, because if we get caught into theory, and theory can actually present itself experientially. Now, when we understand the theory of something, it can affect how we experience, and then we might think that that is practical because it's actually experienced. So you might start to see the doorknob as energy because you understand that you understand the concept, and it's become so well understood intellectually and theoretically that a doorknob is energy. And we might think that now we know it as energy. You know, when we see the doorknob, instead of seeing metal, we see energy, maybe even vibrating energy. And the thing is that we're still seeing a metal doorknob or a doorknob. What has happened is our intellect has understood the truth, or rather a deeper understanding of the doorknob, but the intellect hasn't kept that in perspective. And so now we almost visualize it when we see it. it's as though we're saying to ourselves, that is not metal, that is energy. And we can start to experience it as if it is energy. Now, I hope some of you can see what I'm getting at. And we can go around actually then thinking that we know it as energy because that's how we see it, as energy. Until someone says, look, maybe your concept that is not, it's not inaccurate, but it's theoretical. And so we have to understand the difference between a theoretical concept and a practical concept. A theoretical concept is theoretically correct. It means it's not wrong, but it doesn't present itself in practice. And a practical concept is something you can observe, actually observe in practice. So if we say, theoretically, the door handle is energy, but practically, it is metal. So the practical we can observe, we can see the metal. The theoretical we can't. But when we understand the theoretical so well, and in fact, we're told that the fact that it is presenting as metal is an illusion, right? And it's not real. Imagine that. That's what the concept that's trying to help us to understand that it is energy. Maybe the concept might even say it's not separate from all the other objects, because all the other are energy also. And that teaching, that concept is there for a reason. And then when we get it and we understand, oh, wow, all the different objects are just energy vibrating at different resonances and therefore expressing themselves, the energy expressing itself in different form. And we now appreciate that the lowest common denominator of all the objects is energy. And we can really appreciate that and understand it theoretically, and then start to sort of quasi-experience it. But is that experience maybe influenced by our thinking? And so if someone then comes along, and if the person who's seen this says, you know, that it's an illusion that the door handle is made of metal, and it's an illusion that the table is made of wood, it's actually energy. The truth is it's energy. And someone comes along and goes, I think you're a little bit disconnected from the practical level of life. You're lost in the theoretical. And I'll come back to the irony. I hope you can maybe see some parallels here. The irony is that the person who's now understood that the lowest common denominator of all objects is energy becomes convinced that they now know the truth and thinks seeing it as metal or wood is illusion, is error. And so then someone comes along and says, hey, do you realize that what you're saying is that the handle, the door handle, the table doesn't exist? It's just an appearance. But let's not lose touch with the practical. You know, what you're saying is it's an illusion. It isn't really metal. It isn't really wood. But in practical terms, what is it? In practical terms, is it energy? And the thinking might say, oh, you just don't understand. You're still getting caught up in the appearance. You haven't seen what I've seen. So I understand why you're trying to say that in practical terms it's still wood, but if you really see what I've seen, you'll see it's not wood anymore, it's just energy. And this is something that happens in spiritual seeking, where there is such a conviction that the truth has been understood and is experienced. The truth is actually experienced. And then if grace hits and the person realizes, oh my God, I've been insisting that the handle doesn't exist, that it's just an illusion, it's just an appearance, and the truth is that it's energy. And when it clicks, that in experience, practically speaking, it's a handle. It's a door handle, and it works as a door handle, and it has a specific purpose in practical terms. So it doesn't make sense to go around calling, oh, can you pour me some energy, please? Can you turn on the energy? Can you close the energy? I'd like some silence in here. Can all of you energy go out, please? And that's when we can become really humble. It's like, oh, I thought I knew the truth. And in fact, that concept of truth was preventing me from seeing what is. To really know it. So then there can be an integration of the understanding that wasn't known before, the understanding that everything is energy, and integrating that with how it presents in practice. So we understand the 2 points of view where both concepts are correct. Neither is truth, they are complementary. And so the irony in non-duality is that in order for us to see something that was unseen, what is known overly well needs to be diminished and essentially allocated to the realm of illusion, so that our attachment to it, our identification with it, our way of seeing it can loosen because of a feedback movement, an internal feedback movement that starts weakening what we have held as truth. So the old view was that is just a physical object. And so the teaching says that is not a physical object, that is consciousness. And so we need to actually, at some point before, in order for this new seeing to happen, the system needs to say, that is not a physical object. We might not understand it at first, but we trust that that's not a physical object, that's consciousness. And that's before we really understand. And then at a certain moment, we might get it. Oh, I see. We get it because we have started undermining our old belief that that is a physical object. So we've started off saying that is not a physical object. That is consciousness, that is energy. And then if grace hits, I get it. Then there's no capacity to say it's a physical object, because the process needed us to discount it as a physical object. So then now we just simply can't accept it as a physical object. We can only insist it as it is consciousness or it is energy. And anyone who calls it a physical object is ignorant in our way of thinking. Whereas at some point we will maybe realize, that concept which helped the concept that was taken to be truth, that helped to see it from perspective now meant that I don't know it truly. I didn't know it truly before, and I don't know it truly until an integration happens. So the teaching asks us to ask a very important question: what am I really seeking? And to answer it in practical terms. Because if we answer it in theoretical terms, we end up with a fancy answer, maybe. An answer that we think is right because we've heard it, but we don't really know what it is. It's outside of our experience. And we might get lost in a theoretical seeking for something theoretical. So imagine if you're seeking to know the world as energy. And what if that is actually not practically available? And here we are seeking. It's like I'm seeking myself as consciousness. I'm seeking to know the world as consciousness. And we become convinced that's what I'm seeking. And what if that is a theoretical understanding that we can have and that is important, and yet it's only part of the understanding? And so if that becomes our objective, then we might find ourselves seeking for something that's not really what we're seeking. And then the seeking process is off. So this teaching, which complements the other teachings that I'm talking about and values them, because we do need to see certain things differently. So there are plenty of theoretical understandings that we have to have. But the beginning of this teaching says, ask yourself, what is it you're really seeking in practical terms? So that then you can become more and more certain about that answer. Because if it's in practical terms, you can start to understand the practical in more and more detail, because you can feel it, you can experience it, you can see it. And the answer that is suggested, not an answer that you believe, because the question needs to be answered for yourself with your own deep understanding, where you go, that, yes, that is the answer. Hopefully it replaces an old answer to that question. What am I really seeking? A lot of seekers haven't even asked that question. It makes sense to ask that question, I think. Otherwise, we're sort of seeking blindly. So the suggested answer to that question is, what I'm seeking is the end of suffering. Now, that the end of suffering is a concept. I'm putting it forward to you. It's a concept, but it's a very practical concept. Why is it practical? Because you can feel suffering. You can feel it, you can experience it, you can know it intimately. Suffering is described as an uncomfortableness with oneself and an uncomfortableness with the other, an uncomfortableness of life. Talking uncomfortableness of the sun shining on you when it's too hot. That's a physical uncomfortableness that would fit into the category of either pleasure or pain. And it can be felt. But the uncomfortableness that we're talking about is a psychological uncomfortableness, an uncomfortableness that fits into the category of guilt, blame, pride, worry, or expectation. And that psychological uncomfortableness is always an attitude, or is always on the level of your attitude to what is happening in life. So the concept is saying what we're really looking for is the end of suffering, the end of the uncomfortableness with oneself or the other. And that end of suffering can be termed peace of mind. So when the suffering never arises again, you have continuous, unbroken peace of mind. So the suffering that doesn't arise has nothing to do with physical suffering. It's not the suffering of, let's say, growing old and finding that you have, limited capacities in terms of your range of movement or your capacity to sleep or, interest in doing certain things, if that happens to be what, or the suffering of starving children. No, these are not, I'm not diminishing that, but I'm just trying to make it clear what the word suffering is referring to and what it's not. So if I say, we're not talking about animal suffering in terms of cruelty to animals and the pain that they might experience for being kept in small cages or treated unjustly. That is going to fit into the category of pleasure and pain. So the uncomfortableness with oneself is an uncomfortableness on the level of the way one feels in life, the way one feels about life, about being alive. And so another way of answering the question, is what are you really looking for in practical terms? And you say, in practical terms, I just want to be happy. But we have to be clear that the happy means not happiness through outcomes, not happiness that we'll get when life is perfect, but a happiness that can pervade and persist regardless of the circumstance we find ourselves in, meaning that life is going to morph from one moment to the other, one day to the next, 1 month to the next, 1 year to the next. It's going to be a changing feast. Our circumstance might get more favorable or less favorable. Sometimes we get what we want. Sometimes we don't get what we want. And sometimes we get much more than what we want. And the happiness is finding ourselves comfortable with life, regardless of the circumstance. And comfortable with life means comfortable with myself and with the other. Ultimately, comfortable with myself. So someone might have the idea, no, seeking is bliss. Seeking is about love. Seeking is about union with God. Seeking is about oneness. Seeking is about knowing oneself. Seeking is about the end of being reborn. Seeking is about the end of karma. All of these concepts. Now, to an extent, seeking might be about some of those concepts, at least, or some of those concepts play into what is actually delivered in practical terms as at the end of our seeking process. But I wouldn't be satisfied saying that in practical terms, seeking is about oneness. In practical terms, seeking is about the end of reincarnation. In practical terms, seeking is about bliss. In practical terms, seeking is about love. I say none of those are good descriptions of what is available when the seeking process, let's say, finalizes. And I use that loosely because I think we're always going to be going through a process of change. And evolution and development, but there are some very significant change points. And so if we say primarily what is seeking about, in practical terms, I wouldn't say any of those descriptions are the best description or even good descriptions on a practical basis of what, to describe what is delivered, what is available as part of this seeking process. And so there's a reason for going through this. So if we have one of those descriptions, one of those concepts, which I say is not really very good in my experience, at least in the way I would describe what is practically available, it makes sense that someone would say, okay, tell me what your description is, and I'll see if it makes more sense. And that's all I'm asking. I'm not asking you to take on my description, to believe it, but it's a description that you can test for yourself. And the description is, in practical terms, according to this teaching, liberation, enlightenment, the end of seeking, means the end of suffering. Enlightenment is the end of suffering. The end of suffering is peace of mind, unbroken peace of mind in daily living. Now, to an extent, that's theoretical still, or at least, sorry, it's not theoretical, it's intellectual, because it can't be confirmed if someone doesn't have that. If peace of mind isn't there, then you'd say, well, I mean, I understand what you mean, but I don't know if that's what it's really about. I haven't got that. So that's something we should acknowledge, because otherwise we'll just say, yes, it's about peace of mind. So how is it that we can start to become more comfortable and confident that that is the right answer to this question that we need to have, so that our seeking remains focused and on track, so that we don't get lost in going after certain notions? We can start with, well, if I don't know what, so I think everyone could agree, I just want to be happy. And we could say, I don't know what happy is. I have been seeking happiness in outcomes, and that hasn't delivered happiness. So I say, okay, my happiness isn't to be found in outcomes. I still want happiness, but it isn't to be found in outcomes. I've been trying to get it in outcomes, and I've received the outcomes that I have been seeking from time to time. And it doesn't deliver a continuous, sustained happiness. So if we are going to run with this idea that I'm looking for happiness, we have to drop the idea of what it is and just say, happiness is what I'm looking for, to be happy in life, to be okay with life, but I don't know what form it takes. And you can start off by eliminating, saying, well, I've been trying it to get it in pleasure, and it hasn't happened. So then we can go to, okay, if I'm looking for happiness, it has been suggested that happiness is something very simple. Happiness is the absence of unhappiness. So you can say, does that make sense? That happiness could be just the absence of unhappiness. And so that's an exploration that is not going off into the realm of theory. So you can then say, okay, let me look at my unhappiness. This is something we do know. If we don't have happiness, we can say, okay, I think happiness is very interrelated with unhappiness. So let me look at what my unhappiness is. And if you look in this moment, you might not find anything. It might not be really present for you to look. So wait for a time where you can put your hand on your heart and say, in this moment, I know I am not happy. Right? There will be a moment where you can say, in this moment, I might not know what happiness is, but I can definitely hand on my heart say, in this moment, I am not happy. And then look at it. Look at what is there in that moment. So it's asking us to be really practical, to not run off with some idea. So if I say, why are you not happy? And you come up with a theory, which is the theory you've always had, right? That might not be right. It might be the theory of why you're unhappy that is not a theory, not a concept from your own investigation, your own close looking. And so we might say, I'm unhappy because that person has delivered a result that wasn't what we agreed on. You know, that's why I'm unhappy. Now that, unfortunately, is the wrong answer. I appreciate that someone says, well, you've told me to look at my unhappiness and give you an answer from my own experience. And I'm telling you, in this moment, I'm not happy because the person that said they were going to do X, Y, and Z has delivered something very substandard and charged me a lot of money for it. That's why I'm unhappy, because of what they did. So that's fair. But the teaching gives us some guidance in a way. It puts forward the suggested answers to maybe help us look beyond some of the short-sightedness that we might have. So it says, actually, your unhappiness is never really because of the circumstance, but always because of your attitude to the circumstance. But the attitude to circumstance, because it is an attitude towards circumstance, will seem like it's the circumstance that is the problem. That's why if someone answered it just from a surface assessment, why are you unhappy in this moment? Because they did that. So the teaching says, well, actually, your unhappiness is never because of the circumstance, but always because of your attitude to the circumstance. The circumstance is either pleasurable or painful. So would you agree that that person not delivering the outcome that they had promised, not delivering the quality of work that they had promised and charging you a high price is pain in the moment? It's not in line with your preferences. Yes. I agree that it's a painful circumstance. And can you see that the uncomfortableness that you have, the unhappiness, is because you are blaming the other person for being the one who has delivered this. So you see them as the cause of the negative outcome, the painful outcome. And could it be that this is very uncomfortable because there is also a belief, not only that the other has done this to you and is responsible themselves, nothing else has made this happen except for them. And could it be that you have an idea of yourself that says, my completeness is dependent on bad things not happening? And could it be that because you see the person as this individual entity that is the cause of the pain and nothing else, just them, so the cause of the pain, and because you know yourself as something that is diminished by pain, that those beliefs are what creating the uncomfortableness. And that if those beliefs weren't there, then the circumstance could be the same, not in line with your biological preferences. So you would still say, well, I would prefer that this didn't happen. This is financial pain. This is inconvenience, another form of pain. And yet, if we had a different attitude to the other, a different attitude to why these things happen, a different attitude to what that means about me, then doesn't it make sense that the feeling of unhappiness may actually be very different, even given the circumstance being the same? So as we start to investigate this, and maybe even find ourselves from time to time not feeling this uncomfortableness towards the other, and not feeling dependent, not feeling that my sense of self is actually attacked by painful circumstance. As we start considering the pointers, we might actually agree that my happiness is attitudinal and not circumstantial. So all of this is giving us a better understanding of unhappiness in this case. And why? Because we're moving along a process of investigating for ourselves our own experience, so that we can come up with an answer to the question, what am I really looking for in practical terms? So we need to do a practical investigation. So the teaching is there giving you unfolding the concept in order for you to investigate it, hopefully come up with ticks next to the concepts, and then be able to say, oh, I know for myself what my unhappiness is. Not as a concept. The concept was there to start with. It helped me to look and to feel. And after investigating the notion that my happiness is always attitudinal to circumstance else, I keep saying, yes, that is correct. Yes, that is correct. Each time I feel unhappy, I ask myself, okay, I know I'm unhappy in this moment. So what is this unhappiness? Look, and we will consistently find that our unhappiness is always an uncomfortableness with oneself, an uncomfortableness with the other. That makes us feel uncomfortable with life, makes us feel like life should be different, that the way life is at the moment is unacceptable, because it's unacceptable because of this uncomfortableness, which means how can we accept life if we feel uncomfortable in it? On the level of the very core of who we are, we're going to feel completely restless and out of place if there is uncomfortableness at the core of who we are. And so investigating this time and time again, we'll become really familiar with our unhappiness. And then we can say, well, it could be really that my happiness is the end of that, is the absence of that uncomfortableness. And we will start to appreciate that in the gaps between the uncomfortableness, if we really start to compare the times when there is no suffering, compare it to the times when we say, in this moment, I am unhappy, no doubt about it, we might start to appreciate the simplicity of life free of suffering, even just for those windows that. And if those windows present themselves in fairly profound ways, where the suffering gets cut off in an instant, because a certain type of thinking starts reminding us, my happiness isn't to be found in circumstance. My happiness is about the ending of my attitude towards circumstance. And so that can then mean, in a particular moment, the blaming of the contractor that did the shoddy work and charged you a lot of money can cut off, and we can come back into the present moment and start finding a connection to the real core of the human being. And then we start getting our own practical experiential feedback that confirms that my happiness isn't to be found in outcomes, that my happiness is always here at the core of who I am, as long as the suffering attitude is not active. So we get the practical feedback that says what you are is already at peace. What you are at your core is happy and at peace, even in the face of unfortunate circumstance. And we might see that the attitude of blaming the other as the one that caused the suffering might get cut off, because we might have an explanation that says, this person is really an expression of life, designed by life, and they're just functioning according to life. I mean, if there's a tiger in the woods and you're walking in the woods and the tiger starts growling at you, and fearful life makes sense. There's a wild tiger growling at you. The tiger is doing what they're designed to do. And if the tiger were to maul you, it's not at all going to be what you would call in line with your biological preferences. Very unfortunate circumstance. However, the tiger has been designed by life to be a predator. And people have been designed by life to be predators. Some people. Other people have been designed to be unkind in different ways. Some people have been designed to be very kind. Some people designed to want to help others. Some people only designed to want to get the best for themselves. And even those are very general descriptions, because the truth is that people are designed in a way that is always, very different in different circumstances. So if that sets in, and we understand that we can't help being a particular way and feeling a particular way in life, because that is a response or a reaction based on a very specific makeup that is always changing, but in the present moment, it's one way, the way it is. And the circumstance is the way it is, very complex, and the two come together, and there's this complex, impersonal reaction. It's impersonal, but it can feel the reaction, that what is produced as the feeling can feel very personal. It can be that happened in the circumstance is a personal attack. So the feeling can feel very personal. However, the personal feeling is a very impersonal movement. Impersonal meaning there is no one that produced it. There is a complex body-mind organism that exists in a very complex circumstance, and that personal feeling is an expression of an instrument that is really quite impersonal, in the sense that it wasn't designed by a person. It was designed by life. And so if this starts to become clear, our attitude towards what happens through us, our attitude about what happens through the other, can start to change, and we start to experience, wow, my unhappiness was always about my attitude to life. And as the attitude starts changing, we start to see the unhappiness falling away. And then we get our own experience, as I mentioned, sometimes very profound contrast between unhappiness and happiness, which is very powerful. That's why the flip-flopping phase can be so revealing. The flip-flopping phase is where the seeking has started to really uproot things, and people have weeks of or days of peace of mind. The peace of mind that is described as peace that passeth understanding. And why it's described like that is because it is the peace that is not circumstantial. You can't really find a cause for the peace, except you realize it isn't a peace that is additional. It is the peace of who I am, which is when it says the peace that passeth understanding, it's because what it's talking about is our understanding of life is a life of causality. And so we imagine that if we have peace, it must be caused by something. It must be the addition of something. It must be because someone's, I don't know, making us laugh or doing some act, and therefore that is the cause of my peace. But what we find is that the peace is inherent, and it just gets covered over by the unpeace, the non-peace, which is the suffering, which is always our attitude to circumstance. So when that attitude starts dissolving, we are at peace regardless of the circumstance, simply because the attitude has changed. So what is the attitude that we have when suffering is what is arising? It is the attitude of doership, personal doership, and the attitude of attachment to outcome. The attitude that says you are a separate independent entity. You acted and you behaved, you spoke, you thought, you felt, because you created that. So that then makes us see the other as a separate entity from life. The doer. It's an attitude that sees the other as what they aren't really. They are not the doer. They are a complex biological instrument functioning. And that same attitude of doership sees myself as, if the attitude of doership sees myself as the orchestrator, the one in control. And so if I function and it delivers an unfortunate outcome, then we hate ourselves. So I should have done it differently. I, the doer, the one in control of how I function in each moment, should have known better, should have functioned differently. And this is, unfortunately, an attitude we have to ourselves and the other that is completely out of line with how we can come to see life. And it creates our uncomfortableness. And the other part of the attitude of attachment to outcome, is an attitude which is part of our psychological identity that says, I need life to be a certain way. And until it's that way, I'm not going to be happy. And when it's that way, I'll be happy. And the unfortunate thing is that we're, with that identity in place, we're unhappy when it's not in line with how we want it. And even if it turns out how we want it, we're still unhappy, because that identity can't be happy. That identity is unhappiness. So even its ideas about what it needs to be happy are wrong. So that identity just means unhappiness all the time. Too bad. Too bad, so sad. So as we start getting these glimpses of the peace that is simply the falling back of the attitude of doership and attachment to outcome, then we start to go, this is what I'm looking for, not some theory. I know this is the happiness that I'm looking for, because I didn't have it, and I could say I'm unhappy. And I had to at first say, and I don't know what happiness is. But we start investigating, following the hints of the teaching, hints, and we start following those and testing it out for ourselves. And I would suggest that we'll come to the conclusion, beyond what started off as a concept, that, oh, my happiness is the absence of suffering. And this can become really deeply recognized when the flip-flopping process is happening. When the flip-flopping process is happening, it feels like in the flip that everything is understood, that peace that we wake up with in the morning, and when things don't go wrong, they just don't seem to penetrate very deeply. It's like, yeah, that's okay. And that these things happen. And we aren't disturbed. It's sort of like, we could describe it like water off a duck's back. It surprises us. It's like, wow, that in the past, someone criticizing me in the past would have been taken very personally. And now it's like, yeah, that's okay. Not my preference. I'd much rather someone said, what you did was fantastic, instead of someone saying what you did is not so great. So there is pain on the biological level, but on the deep level of self, the pain doesn't lead to an uncomfortableness with ourself. And that's how we can know life in the flip. And when that's happening, because it is a causeless peace, it feels like, well, this is understood. There's no way that I'm going to go back to the old. It doesn't make sense. We know it from our own experience. We're not even making an effort to be at peace. We just find that the unfortunate circumstances taken in our stride. And then we say, this is it. It's happened. Except we wake up one day and it's, oh, goodness. We feel something has changed. Just being in life feels heavier. So the flop has come in. And if with the right guidance, the thought might arise on the moment of flop, there might be enough space for us to have the thought that says, this is the uncomfortableness. That's what the flop is. The flop is the return of the uncomfortableness. And when you look at the flip, you'll say there was nothing really special about life on a circumstantial level. I didn't suddenly win the lottery and people didn't come knocking on my door asking what I want and doing everything according to how I would like it. If that had happened in that week, then we might say, oh, well, my happiness is dependent on everyone doing what I like, and circumstance being pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. But when we look back on it, we say, well, actually, nothing's really changed between then and now. And the flop is just the recurrence of the uncomfortableness with oneself. And we look back on the flip and we just say, well, that was just the absence of uncomfortableness. And then we might have an insight, which is an insight from our own direct experience. All I'm looking for, I don't want bliss. I don't want oneness. I don't want all sorts of things. I just want, and when I say what I want, I say there is no problem when suffering is absent. So we can say, all I'm looking for in practical terms from my own experience is the end of suffering. It's like, if you're trying on a shirt, you put on the white one and you think, no, I'm not sure if it's this one or the other one. And so you put it on and you say, oh, I quite like that one. Then you put another one on and you think, yeah, it's close. Maybe this one. So let's say this is the green shirt. So you've got the white shirt. Yep, white shirt was good. The green one, I'm not sure. I'm thinking it might even be a little better than the white, or I'm not sure. And then you put the red one on. Red one. No, not the red one. So that's from your own experience, it becomes really clear, not the red one. And so you can say, from my own experience, I can be sure that what I'm looking for is not the red one. So when we have this insight based on the suffering not being there, and when the suffering is not there, we might not even really have realized yet that that's what we're looking for, because it's pretty plain and simple. We haven't gained anything. It's just the suffering is there. So we might not even realize that it's anything special. We're just going through life, doing the stuff that we're doing. And we might not even notice that the uncomfortableness isn't there. So we might still have an expectation, oh, I'm looking for oneness. And maybe today is the day of grace when I get struck with some universal insight and suddenly oneness is there. And that's what I think enlightenment is. And then the flop happens the next day, let's say, and the flop is this uncomfortableness. And that's when we might have the insight, I'm not looking for oneness. I'm just looking for the end of suffering. What I had yesterday was fantastic. Relative to when suffering is there, if the suffering then vanishes and we go back, we go, this is bliss. It's not really bliss, is it? It's just the end of suffering. But relative to the suffering, we might even say, this is bliss. It's like having a very intense headache, and then the headache falls away. And you might go, this is bliss. It's not, it's just the absence of the headache. But in contrast, it's bliss. Once the headache-free space is there for 1, 2, 3 weeks, you're not going, this is bliss. It's just normal. But normal is great. Normal is, I'll take normal relative to the presence of the headache in the analogy. And that's why we're told liberation is so simple, so ordinary. It's not extraordinary, except when we compare it to suffering. When we compare it to the state of suffering, we go, wow, that is the jewel in the crown. The end of suffering is the jewel in the crown. That's what we're really looking for, whether we realize it or not. Someone would go, well, you just said it was ordinary and simple. How can that be what we're really looking for? And when you really become clear on what the absence of peace of mind is, suffering, then the real appreciation for the extraordinarily simple, the extraordinarily ordinary, that's when there's an appreciation. And that's when we say, I'm not interested in any of these other fancy ideas of enlightenment. If we're still attached to outcome, we might think, I want the enlightenment that gives me special powers, to be in 3 places at once, to be able to read people's minds, to be able to turn lead into gold. All of that is what the doer and the attachment to outcome imagines will be important. Or we say, I want liberation so that I can then help people, so that I can have retreats, so that I can be loved. So if we start looking at why do you want these things, we might find that we come to this, actually, all I want is to be happy. And I believe that that will give me happiness. I believe that people loving me will give me happiness. So I want it. I believe that having special powers will be so cool that that must give me happiness. So we can then see, actually, I want happiness, but I'm looking for it in the attachment form. I'm still looking for happiness in the form of outcomes. That's why often it's said that non-duality is never going to be a bestseller. The vast percentage of the population aren't interested in hearing that all you're going to get out of the ultimate spiritual quest is nothing. It's like, that's not great spiritual marketing. At some phases and some teachings, it's described as bliss or ecstasy, because the doership and the attachment hears that and says, oh, I want that. I'll spend a couple of years motivated and focused on this spiritual seeking, because the absolute is available. And what is the absolute? Oh, it's bliss. Ananda. I'm interested in that. And they go, so, oh, but you won't exist because the absolute is the annihilation of you, but it's bliss. So, well, okay, that's okay. Bliss is good enough. I'll take that for sure. And it's only somewhere on the track that seeking has sort of developed enough. Our understanding has developed enough. And being able to feel more things with more space and more clarity, and see more dimensions or levels that were previously all mashed together. And that's when we might be ready to say, oh, I don't know that I want all of this extra stuff. That's just a belief. So I'm not even going to, I'm not going to follow that. I'm going to have to test it out for myself. So I thought I was going to talk about authenticity today. I did know that, the topic of authenticity, the topic of truth, the topic of real, these are all interrelated words, is in itself very relative, which sounds sort of like a oxymoron. How can the topic of truth be relative? They sort of seem like opposites. You have to define what you mean by truth, what you mean by authentic. It can be, truth can be applied, and authenticity can be applied on very many levels. So one sort of definition of truth on what we could say is sort of like one of the more ultimate levels. And I'll use these words loosely, because one of the concepts I have is there is no truth. At least there isn't a truth that we can know or even be. But teachings will talk about truth because it's very powerful to label something as truth, because that allows our thinking to really value it. So these words, absolute, truth, reality, they're labels given by teachings, even the teachings that say, I'm not putting forward any concepts, or I'm not putting forward, there's no labels, don't label anything. They're still actually delivering concepts. Although the concept is that there's no concepts, but it's still concept. Talk about the absolute and reality, because that is very, it's very, it's a profound teaching that understands how our psychology works. So when you awaken to the truth that is pointed at by the concept of truth, it will feel like truth because it's, let's say, it's relatively true compared to what it is that we were focusing on before. And then whatever truth, whatever you have come in contact with or realized or has opened up, and you say, oh, that is truth, I'm pretty certain I can put in a concept that will debunk that as truth, will point it out as being changeable. So for anyone out there going, oh, what about the awareness that is aware of all of the changeable? That's not truth. That's not absolute. It's described as absolute because that's going to help us become aware of it. And then when we start putting in some concepts to help us see that in a more integrated way, to understand the witnessing awareness in a more integrated way, we'll start to see how maybe our thinking that it is truth is turning something that is relative into absolute again. Now, it is relatively more true than something else. It is relatively more real than something else in the manifestation. And so when there is a shift from identification with something that is more changeable to that which feels less changeable, it's going to be experienced as if, oh, this is the absolute. And so often someone might say, oh, I am is the absolute for them at a certain phase. And then a teaching will say, oh no, I am is just an object. And it is what is aware of I am that is the absolute. And then there might be a recognition of that is pointed at. And the concept says that doesn't change and everything arises and falls in it. And so it can seem like we'll say, oh, of course, that is the unchanging, the background of awareness that is even prior to the sense of I am, for example, or which can be described as the primary object arising within that field of awareness that is not an object and all sorts of things. So we can become convinced that is the absolute. And then there'll be books written titled Beyond the Absolute. And so that's the teaching pointing to what is even beyond what you have come to know as the absolute, which you can then maybe think as beyond the absolute. Isn't that also, doesn't that sound like an oxymoron? Can there be something beyond the absolute? And so I'll throw in why, for example, the awareness that we can come to like think that, oh, that's what I am, feel, it can be, the experience can be, I am the awareness in which everything arises, the presence or the whatever word you're using. Everyone will have their own words. So someone goes, no, with the witnessing or the awareness is different to witnessing. Awareness is different to presence. Someone else will use the word presence to mean witnessing, which means awareness. But so awareness is one of the things that often is the word used for that which is known to be aware of everything that comes and goes. And when that opens up, it actually feels like the awareness is a background and all of the content is what is changing, and the awareness remains unchanging and ever present. And the content changes. Now, when we think about that, that shift has happened because it's been described a certain way by teachings, and that has inspired our thinking, and that has inspired changes, and that then inspires a change in the way that the experience presents. And then the teaching will come along and say, well, actually, you know, that is it's a duality now. We've created a new duality that you're experiencing as the absolute and truth. And you're saying the awareness is the real and the content is the unreal. And yet we're told that the truth is non-dual, that life is non-duality, that seeing reality is knowing non-duality. So the seeker that has awoken to reality from their perspective, when they start investigating a bit closer, they might admit, oh yes, there is a conceptual duality created here. That which is unchanging, that which is real, that which is truth, and all of the content that is untrue, changing, not real. And so then it's described that the content is not separate from the awareness. So we can have those two concepts and understandings within us, but the second one, where the awareness is not separate from the objects or the content, may not have become deeply understood yet. So the teaching starts saying, oh, it sounds like you're at a phase of the awakening process where there is this appreciation, or the experience is experientially presenting, where the sense of self is the witnessing awareness of all of the objects or consciousness arising as objects, all of the content that is changing. It sounds like that's what it is, but have you considered that non-duality means that the objects are not separate from the awareness in which they all arise? So as we start thinking about that concept more and more, which will resonate with us because we will also have heard so often, and it would have resonated with us that truth is non-duality. So then this explanation that the objects and the consciousness, or the objects and the awareness that is aware of the objects, are not two. The awareness is not seeing the objects at a distance, but rather the objects are arising within awareness, made of awareness, and witnessed by awareness. So that starts to become a description of non-duality. And so that is part of the progression. And then the experience starts to change so that the background of awareness seems less like a background and more like a all-pervading awareness in which everything is arising and not separate from the awareness itself. So now the conceptual duality that has influenced the way the experience is being experienced, the concept is changed, so we start thinking about it differently, and then the experience starts to change, and now I see reality. Reality has now presented. It's not two. It's not a background content that is changing. It is the content and the awareness are not two. Okay, so right. Okay, so that before that you thought was reality and truth, now you see it wasn't truth, because now the new truth has been revealed. So why is that not absolute? Why is the awareness, why can't we say the awareness is unchanging and ever present? Well, if the awareness is not separate from the content, and the content is ever changing, that then causes a problem with our definition of awareness as the absolute, because we were okay with it being the absolute when we had the idea awareness is unchanging and ever present. Now we have this integrated understanding, which is much more in line with the non-duality, and it can be experiential. And we can be sure that I know the truth now, but now that causes a problem because the content is changing. It's not separate from the awareness. So maybe we say, well, in that case, awareness and content are not two, which means I can't say that the content is changing and the awareness is unchanging. So we have this dilemma. We might start to find that we can't find any truth. We might think that that's truth for some time until our concept of truth gets shown to be quite relative. So let's look at truth on the level of practical daily living. One thing that often arises when the suffering, the uncomfortableness gets quite intense, which it can do from time to time within the seeking process. And it feels like the intensity feels like this, it could be a problem. It feels like it doesn't serve any purpose. But the intensity may well be serving a purpose. The intensity of the suffering can make us feel and conclude something quite intuitively correct, where we say, I've had enough of living life this way. I've had enough of feeling this way. I just want to know the truth. Now, that might in part be inspired by some of the teachings that we're reading that talk about reality, talk about truth, talk about knowing oneself, talk about having forgotten oneself or ignorance, not knowing oneself. So all of those things are pointing towards untruth, unreal, inauthentic, not what we are. And illusion is another word. And then the opposite that is being spoken about is reality, truth, and non-duality is described as the same as reality or truth or the absolute. And so that might contribute as to why this feeling comes up when the suffering is there, because intuitively or somewhat inspired by the teachings, we know that this suffering is not what we really are. It's not the truth of who we are. And so it's part of not knowing ourselves. And in this teaching, that means the psychological identity that is based on deeply ingrained beliefs, which are not accurate ways of seeing the actual dynamics of life. And so we might say, I just want the truth. That's all. I don't want any fancy experiences. I surrender. I just want to know the truth. And so when truth starts to become something we intuitively know is what we're looking for, then it's good to start getting some descriptions of those aspects in life that are untrue or that are not accurate or misguided, illusory. So we could get given pointers along the lines of what I was talking about before. If the aim is to wake up to, let's say, the awareness, which is a component of the human being that is always here, but has been overlooked. And so to know ourselves truly, we must recognize a component that is key to who we are. And as part of that methodology of getting us to realize that, it can be talked about as the truth, and then the body, let's say, as the unreal. What about if we talk about what is true on a more practical level? So that's not to say that pointing to the awareness as truth is not, that is an awakening that can be very useful and important along the way. But what about the psychological me, the idea of who I am? So for example, the feeling of unworthiness, if that is what arises for someone, the feeling of shame, suffering in its different forms. So suffering includes the feeling of unworthiness, the feeling of shame, the sense of abandonment, which is linked to shame or not being good enough or not being worthy to be kept. So because I'm not worthy, because I'm not good enough, I was abandoned. So all of these are interlinked. So what if we're told that is not true? What if we're told that your yearning for love actually stems from the sense that you are not lovable? Your desire for love is actually an expression of the deeply ingrained sense that I am not worthy. So we are seeking love from the other in order to prove that uncomfortable feeling wrong, because we've concluded that if I get love from the other, I can then eradicate this idea that I'm not lovable, and then everything will be okay. What that's doing is actually validating the possibility, or validating the idea that I can be unlovable, and one day I will change unlovable to being lovable. So the feeling of being unlovable can be described as an error or untrue, a false sense of self, a mistake, a wrong idea of who we are. Because if it's not, it feels very real, and then it forces a certain movement outwards, the movement of seeking love from the other, seeking approval from the other, seeking validation from the other. And for as long as that is maintained to be truth, then that movement of seeking love seems like a worthwhile movement, where we go out and try and prove ourselves. And if we finally get appreciation, we can go, oh, good, I have changed from being unlovable to being lovable, or unworthy to worthy. So for as long as that movement carries on, we are actually reinforcing that which is false and untrue, and reinforcing it as valid and true. And the strategy of seeking love from the other forces us to put on a mask, forces us to be inauthentic. Because we believe that if I'm authentic, I don't have the best chance of the other liking me or loving me. I need to hide all of those aspects of myself that are not going to be appealing. I need to put my best foot forward. That strategy is the only strategy that will make sense and be implemented for someone who is looking for approval, acceptance, being understood, and love from the other. So it means that we will go through life presenting ourselves in what we hope is the best light, which means maybe lying, completely lying to the world, and that by default means lying to ourselves about who I am. Whereas in fact, what we find is that when we're authentic, people appreciate authenticity. It's very hard to be authentic if we're trying to get something. Because take an example of a fencing contractor, someone who supplies and installs garden fences, let's say, or house fences, or whatever, industrial fences. And you've got a big property and you call them round and you say, look, I'd like to put up a fence around my whole property to keep my dogs in. Can you give me a quote? And so they look at your property. Now, if the person is attached to a particular outcome, it's their strategy to get a particular outcome. And let's say their strategy is to make the most money out of their business. Then they're going to try and sell you one of their fences. That's the only thing that's going to make sense to them. In fact, they're going to try and sell you the fence that is going to overall make them the most money. So they'll pitch a fence to you that they hope is within your budget, that is the most profitable for them, so that there's the best chance of you saying yes. Now, an authentic business owner might come and say, to be honest, what you're looking for, the application that you're trying to achieve, will be better served by approaching it this way. And the way that they suggest may put themselves outside of the running. They'll say your property is too big to fence off with the type of fence you're looking for. It's not economic, but you could use this alternative. I don't supply that. I'm sorry. And there's a value in that. It might not be valuable to a certain objective of making the most money. It may be, because someone might say, wow, I really appreciate you being so upfront about it. The real value is, and so they might, because the person might say, look, you've told me that this isn't the best option, but I still want to go with you and do it. I understand I could get a more economic thing, but I'd like to do it because I feel good about working with you. Or they might say, thanks, I'm going to do this other option. And then next week they refer a very big job to you from, a business that they work with or a friend that they have. They say, you have to use this guy. He's great. But where it's got more value is for the person themselves. They are not, that person has probably realized, has felt that authenticity delivers something less tangible in a way, but much more valuable than setting up certain other objectives. They've realized that, approaching things a certain way might seem right to certain desires, but it has a consequence. And spiritual seeking is full of paradoxes. It says give away and the more you will receive. It's sort of like, what do you mean give away them? It just sounds counterintuitive. Giving is better than receiving. Like, that doesn't make any sense if what you want is more. And yet, as things change, as we change, we might start to find that our priorities are changing, and that notion, that concept that seemed to make no sense in the past, starts to make sense. And so this bringing authenticity into one's life is not something you can force, but it's something you can sort of be inspired to do when the time is right. If we've felt uncomfortable because of something that we intuitively feel is inauthentic, that's the time when everything will conspire to give us motivation to do it differently, give us motivation to confront the fear that is bound to be there when we let go of what we've known. And one of the things that we have to start doing if we are going to be authentic is to start feeling, to start being truthful to ourselves, to be truthful about what we really want, what is really important, what feels right. Knowing that it may not be absolutely right, that it may, what feels right may change over time, but that in the present moment, what feels right can be referred to as a truth. It's a relative truth because it might change. So how can it be truth if it's going to change at some point in the future? And so one of the practical truths is to do what you feel like, to become aware that authenticity involves dropping into a sense of letting go of our agendas, letting go of being attached to certain outcomes because we're convinced that that's where our happiness is going to be found, to challenge that and to be more authentic, to realize if we're saying something to someone to make them feel good, to realize that we might be late for an occasion and automatically come up with a lie to make it more palatable. And say, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to lie. So that's a fairly direct, no, not direct, what's the word? So to stop making up stories is, lost the word. It's not much of a metaphor, right? It's like, well, if you want to be authentic, stop lying. Okay, but what about if you want to be authentic, do what you feel like? So we might find all of these different versions of inauthenticity. It's like, I'm just going to tell them the truth. You know, if you knock something over and break it, you know, we might be afraid to own up to it. And when authenticity and truth becomes our priority because we get a sense that something much more valuable than we imagine can come out of that. An alignment with life, withdrawing power from the false sense of identity that has developed and has been fed by the way that we interact in life. So I can't emphasize more that this recognition that authenticity and coming into a more true expression and being more honest with oneself, more honest with other people, is such an important part of coming to know oneself truly. Because we'll see all of these strategies, all of these agendas that have been put in place primarily around attachment to outcomes. And the attachment to outcome is either for us to feel better about ourselves, to feel right, to feel valid, to feel worthy, or to have other people think that we are right and valid and worthy. And so we see that we're lying, putting up a mask. And in doing that, we're compromising our internal authenticity. We're compromising our true self. In fact, it's a disconnection from what we truly are. This means being authentic about friendships. It means being authentic about work. It means being authentic about play. And there's lots of, it will unfold once we find that is what becomes our new priority. And authenticity often means taking attachment to outcomes off. That you're inauthentic. It's stemming from the false sense of who we are, the belief that my happiness is to be found in outcomes. And the truth of what we're really looking for is peace of mind that exists regardless of outcomes, which means a disconnect, a withdrawing of involvement, a withdrawing of the sense of self that feels defined by outcomes. That's why taking the objective of pleasure, 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 which is ultimately love from the other, off the pedestal. So even if we want to be successful, we want to be successful because we think we'll be appreciated for our success. We'll be able to appreciate ourself, which is self-love. It's not really self-love. We think it's going to be self-love. And we'll be appreciated by society because of what we've achieved. So we strive for success. We strive for fame. We imagine fame means I am loved. I have done good enough things. We don't want to be infamous. We want to be famous. We want power because we believe that if we have power, we have won. And if we've won, we must be the best. And so we really have to take this attachment to outcomes off the pedestal and realize that is inauthentic. That has got nothing to do with my true self. And stick on the pedestal peace of mind so that each time we find ourselves running with agenda, we realize, oh no, that's the old priority. The new priority is to find myself connected to self, which is where my peace of mind comes from. I won't take questions today because there's 5 minutes before the end, and there's one other topic, short, that I spoke about today in a one-on-one session that came out in a way that I haven't described before. And I think it's very useful, and it refers back to this notion of awareness. Like, awareness is something that awareness or consciousness, something that's often spoken about as being, sometimes it's referred to as our true nature, that which we truly are. I say it's an aspect of the human being, and it's been overlooked. So even when it's pointed out as our true nature, we're told it's been overlooked. We've lost touch with it. We don't realize that that is fundamental to life experience. And I think a lot of people in seeking have heard about consciousness, and there's a frustration about this consciousness or this awareness. What is it? We might know, we might say, oh, awareness is what we truly are, but do you know it? Do you see it? Like if I say that's a book, you can see the book. And you go, yes, I see the book. If I talk about your hand, you can see your hand. And so if we say the hand is picking up the book, it's not a concept that is just conceptual. It's known experientially. And this awareness is right here for us to know. And yet it's elusive until it's not. And when it's not, it's like, oh my God, how simple. It's just that attention never landed on that. Meaning, so when we've realized what awareness is, that's why it's described as awareness becoming aware of the awareness that has always been here. Awareness aware of itself by itself. And it's here in every single moment of daily living. So for you to be hearing these words, there needs to be a registering of the words, an awareness of the sound. And for you to see my hand and my face, there must be awareness present. To see a car or a tree or a bird, the sky, the sun, there is awareness of the sun and the tree and the bird. So it is always here, but the experience feels like, well, I'm just seeing the book that is outside of me or the tree that is outside of me. And so the awareness component is not appreciated because it doesn't seem like it's needed. It doesn't seem like there's anything there. It's just like, well, obviously there's an object out there and there's me, the perceiver, here. And so, of course, it's seen. But it's seen because awareness is functioning through the body-mind organism. So the description is that the human being is the impersonal consciousness of source linked to a particular body-mind organism and functioning through that body-mind organism, personal consciousness. So we'll never know impersonal consciousness, right? So impersonal consciousness linked to a particular body-mind organism, aware of life from the perspective of the body-mind organism, and aware of it in what I would call, what I label, the concepts is our experience of life in each moment is the personal consciousness experience. But the personal consciousness is only there because the impersonal consciousness of source is functioning through the body as that which is aware of all of the objects in life. Now, the personal consciousness experience can present in a very impersonal way. So when there is the experience of life and it feels like there is no thinking, no personality, that is the most impersonal version of personal consciousness. That's not what liberation is. It is usually a state free of suffering, and it's one of the two different states, you could say, of personal consciousness that are free of suffering. If we see that there is another experience of life that is also personal consciousness, so all of your experience of life, no matter what the peak experience is, it's always a personal consciousness experience, according to the concept. And it's the personal consciousness experience can be there because the impersonal consciousness of source is functioning through the body. And so when we have peak experiences that feel very impersonal, it's the impersonal version of personal consciousness. We sometimes think we're looking to know impersonal consciousness. We're looking to be impersonal consciousness. I forget about impersonal consciousness. Life is not about knowing yourself as impersonal consciousness. Life is about knowing yourself as the human being, but being aware that the human being has at its core personal consciousness or just consciousness functioning through it. And the consciousness functioning through the human being allows us to have the personal consciousness experience. Now, personal consciousness doesn't mean suffering. We have always got a personal consciousness experience. There is the very impersonal version of personal consciousness experience. That's when we feel that what we are is awareness and not the body, which is still actually, according to this concept, a personal consciousness experience, which means consciousness functioning through a body-mind, but the experience feels like there is no person, no me, no doer, but even the sense of the body falls away. That is an impersonal version of personal consciousness. Then we have the personal version of personal consciousness without doership and attachment, which is another form of liberated living, where I know myself as Roger, but the suffering isn't part of the experience. So there is personal consciousness living life as Roger, but without suffering. And the other one is personal consciousness experience that feels personal, just like the middle one, but with the suffering, with the uncomfortableness. And the uncomfortableness is the suffering, which is a thought manifestation stemming from this belief in personal doership and attachment to outcome. And liberation is the end of that. Now, recognizing the awareness aspect of the human being can be a significant part of the dissolving of the belief in doership and attachment to outcome, which is why I'm talking about all of this. Still, I haven't got to the point of where necessarily this elusive awareness that I'm saying is always present and which we might intellectually know is always present. But how do we know how valuable it is or what role it plays? So I'm suggesting that if you switched off the consciousness, the whole experience that we know in this moment collapses. It ceases to exist because the awareness is not there to be aware of the objects. So that is hopefully bringing us a bit closer to appreciating that awareness is always here functioning through me when I'm aware of the light, because without awareness or without consciousness functioning through the body, the experience of daily life collapses into what we could say is the equivalent of deep sleep, the absence of daily life. In fact, the absence of experience. And so we could look at awareness a bit like light. And funnily enough, light is used to describe what we truly are. So imagine if the world was completely dark, no light whatsoever, which means the tree in a way is there, the bird is there, the chair is there, the table is there. However, the world is completely devoid of light. And so there is no experience of a tree. And if you shine light on the tree, it's like, oh, now the tree is known, because the light is shone on the tree. And if you turn all the light on, then the whole experience is known. And awareness is sort of like the equivalent of light. Everything is seen because of the awareness that is functioning through us. And we're so used to waking up in the morning and it all being there that it's just become assumed that the seeing of the tree is there because the object is there and because the human is there. The importance, the role of awareness as the light that shines on the object, or that's a metaphor, the light is a metaphor, but hopefully we can see that without consciousness, that which is functioning through us and in which everything is contained. Because if the consciousness didn't quite get to that object, it would be like shining light on the object, but the light just doesn't quite reach it. So the object remains dark. So for the object to be seen, it means awareness has reached beyond it, which means everything that you see is actually within the field of awareness. And your own body is seen by awareness, which means your body is in the field of awareness also. The whole of the present moment is in the field of awareness, recognized by awareness or consciousness. It is fundamental to the existence of our experience of life.